morning, John. Thank you for your delightful video. I think that it legitimately gave me some of the background that I need to hopefully start down the path of enjoying some World Cup, which I legitimately want to do, but I did find myself asking a bunch of questions. I assume most of those questions will be answered just by watching sports, but one less so.
But I'm unsure where their goals are going to come from, although that's also true for the other teams in their group, the US, Australia, and Turkey.
Is Turkey pronounced like that? Do I not know how Turkey is pronounced? Of course I do know how turkey is pronounced, the bird, and unlike almost all countries except for Georgia and perhaps Hungary, Turkey, the country, does have the problem of having its toponym in English, its most common toponym, be more commonly used for a thing that isn't the country than for the country itself. So in America, Georgia, if you hear that, you think the state, not the country. If you hear Hungary and don't see it spelled, you think the sensation, not the country. China may have once also held this distinction, but no one calls their China China anymore, and also we spend a lot of time talking about China the country now. So if you just provide the word China with no context, no one is going to think dishes first. So this is obviously not a great situation for Turkey. Children all over America hear Turkey and they think that it's hilarious that a country is named after a big silly bird. Now, of course, it turns out that the big silly bird is in fact named after the country, but that also has its own problems because, of course, turkeys don't live anywhere near Turkey. Turkeys were actually named after a different kind of bird that looks a little bit like a turkey, guinea fowl, which were traded to Europe through Ottoman trade routes. So they got called turkey fowl because they came through Turkey. These birds, which are not turkeys, are also not from Turkey. Wild fact, in Turkey, they were called Hindi because they thought they came from India, and in India, they're actually sometimes called Peru because they thought they were from Peru, even though Peru doesn't even have turkeys. Anyway, these birds, which are now called guinea fowl, are from sub-Saharan Africa. So now, at least more or less, those birds do have roughly the correct name in English. And also this is true everywhere. So in Turkish and French and Russian and Polish and Hebrew and Armenian and Georgian, yeah, that Georgia, and a bunch of other languages, they all have a name that basically means from India. In Greek and Scottish, it's called like a French bird, like a French hen. And in Levantine Arabic, it's called the Ethiopian rooster, which is closer if you were talking about guinea fowl, but we're not, we're talking about turkeys. In Albanian, it's called the sea rooster. What does that have to do with the sea? I guess it came on boats. There's only one place that calls the turkey by a name-correct name, and that is in Mexico, where turkeys are from. And there, in Mexican Spanish, the bird is called guajolote, which is from a native Nahuatl name for the bird, named by the people who actually domesticated it, the only name on earth that points to the correct place. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about toponyms, the names that we have for places, and toponyms are crazy. We have all these names for other places that have often nothing at all to do with what the people in those places call that place. Georgia, the country, great example. You know what they call their country? Sakartvelo. But as much as I think probably the people of Georgia would like us to start calling their place by the name that their place is named, I can't call Georgia Sakartvelo because that's not the word for that thing in my language. And so people would have no idea what I was talking about if I said it, even though that would have prevented a fair bit of freak out back when Russia invaded Georgia and people in America were like, Georgia? There's a fair bit of discourse that has happened around this topic, and I want to be clear, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if it's Chile, or if it's Chile, or if it's Qatar, or if it's Qatar, or if it's Georgia or Sakartvelo. Language is super weird. It feels like something that no one could ever change, which is wild because, of course, it changes constantly, and as a thing that is entirely constructed by and performed by human minds, the only thing that can change it is people. And there are different things that we're trying for. One is clear communication, and intentional changes can actually get in the way of that, suddenly making me think more about the pronunciation of Turkey than the Turkish national team that you were discussing in your video. And so I went down the rabbit hole, and in the case of Turkey, and this is fascinating, and I did not know it until I wrote up this script, this was a 2022 request by the government of the country to the UN to specifically change the English word for the country to escape sharing an exact word with a silly bird, and also with a slang term that means fool, though this is a very uncommon slang term. If you're Turkish, we don't say that much. You might, if you're, 13 and from the 80s, call somebody a turkey for being a fool. You big old turkey. That's like something you say to a kid. It's not a mean term, just so you know. But I'm down an entire country asks another country to be like, hey, how about Turkey instead of Turkey? I'm like, okay, that's fine. Now, this has been a few years, and I have to be honest, John, your video was the first time I think I ever heard or noticed somebody saying Turkey in that way instead of Turkey. So it doesn't feel like that has super caught on, but there are times when it does. Like, for example, Ukraine never loved being called the Ukraine, which is what we called it when I was growing up, because that kind of implies that it's part of another thing. Like how we might say the Rust Belt as part of America or the Rocky Mountain West. And so I think people in Ukraine were saying, can you stop calling us the Ukraine for a fairly long time? But then there was suddenly like an immediate moral weight to the change. Calling it the Ukraine was like, okay, this is the part of Russia that is the borderlands or the frontier. And that's not what we think. So very quickly, and this change has permeated the entire culture as far as I can tell. No one says the Ukraine anymore. We say Ukraine. And also no one anymore says Kiev, which is the more Russian pronunciation of Kyiv. Though we still, I think, do say Chicken Kiev, which has nothing to do with turkeys. Now, I suspect that Georgians would also not mind us starting to say Sakartvelo, and it would prevent some confusion. And I'm glad that we no longer call Mumbai Bombay, but I do not expect Japan to become Nippon, while at the same time I think that Czechia or Czechia will win out over the Czech Republic eventually. And maybe some people are going to say Brazil and Mexico, but I don't think we're ever going to start calling Germany Deutschland. I just don't know. It's weird. Anyway, John, I'm happy to create a language with you and a billion or so other people. Real weird activity. I'll see you on Tuesday.